some of the pieces I have done, I have left them untitled. Um, all the titles have been pretty much arrived at simply because they felt right. But some pieces, it's sort of a little challenging because it just seems there's no one salient title that would work with it. For example, the piece we're looking at, I've had a situation where I look at the piece on one hand, I see a cross. On the other, I see quite a number of tumultuous images from that one painting. So with this painting here, I see a lot more to it than just the one salient theme, and therefore it makes it, for me at least, a little challenging to title a piece, because I feel sometimes titles can lend a piece
Yeah.
with only one perspective, and this is the piece here, Puzzle. This goes back in 2008, and as you can tell, it doesn't really have too much of difference in terms of style with what I've done. But there are earlier pieces of works that I've created. I think also it's fair to say, from my perspective, there was an element of a political uh, drive with that piece, and that was created around about 2006 and seven. And I think my view as someone living in the diaspora and looking on Africa and looking at quite a lot that's happening from a political perspective, it just felt quite a lot of what I remember, more so of Zimbabwe, seemed to have eroded. And quite a lot of the contributory factors or the driving factors towards that had quite a lot of political implications and that sort of approach. And that was a piece for me that pretty much resonated that, which was more figurative, which would also be quite fair to point out.
I like the way the colors meld into each other.
They it seemed to work for me as well. And um, a little background with that, I used Japanese rice paper, and I don't know if it terribly shows much on an image, but the charcoal gray areas that would they seem to almost suggest. That's right. Thank you. They seem to suggest almost kind of like a gray paint, but far from it. It's actually Japanese rice paper, and the reason why I used it is it allowed to have these natural forms of grayness on a black background without having to heavily rely on one material, which is a paint. Everything is connected for me. I guess talks about a vast number of topics one may think of, relationships in terms of either work or personal or international relationships, that I suppose one can also derive uh, the, the the cycle of consequences or of actions, that in some way or the other everything sort of comes full circle.
Yeah, no, I found this really fascinating, this one. I really like the contrast between sort of the more, I guess, the more vibrant colors, the yellow, the red, and the
Yeah.
white in the foreground, and the more muted grays and blacks and blues in the background. Almost as if the blue and the black was an existing painting, and you've painted over the top of that, which I find really effective, really quite powerful.
And sometimes when I look at this piece, areas as such, and as such as well, they I almost start to see um, some sort of musician playing violin or the other. And I don't know if it's quite obvious to anyone else, but for me, certainly so. So it's almost a piece that keeps giving, more than it keeps evolving every time I look at it. More so, for myself, which I always find interesting when a painting that I've created does that. For me, at least.
Yeah, I definitely think one of the most fascinating aspects about your paintings is how much you leave open to the interpretation of the viewer, and for them to bring their own ideas and their own interpretation of that to the painting. That's really interesting.
Here.
Yeah.
One of my views is art should not be one's knee-jerk reaction to viewing art shouldn't be, at least, about understanding the piece, but should be about the experience and seeking the experience and the soul of a piece. And I think that way, with my abstract pieces, um, it's a start of a journey for one to enjoy it or criticize it, whatever it be that they want to, where they want to begin with that piece. But it's certainly that the experience and the soul of the piece. I think for me that would definitely be my gambit with these pieces.
We're standing on your shoulders, Bruce. So
Here.
you're taking us.
I'm trying to, if you bear with me, I should be able to achieve it successfully. I'm trying to navigate myself just nicely above. There we are. Self-reflection. Um, I don't know if you can if you've noticed this whilst looking at it. This piece was created on the back of a mirror that we acquired from IKEA. This piece, Self-Reflection, is painted behind a mirror with all these subject matters written on the canvas. I talk about the right wing, the left wing, and sadly, along this column here, what you don't see at the moment, for one reason or the other, is I had some inscription. For example, on the right hand side here, I had Iraq, Blair, and Bush. All those three words had a common letter which I used to join all of them up. So in putting all these points here, the deficit and this letter, this envelope from the House of Parliament is to get people to think about these issues. Now, I'm going to see if, hang on, if we have other paintings. Yes, we do. And just right behind us, we have emotions. Um, yeah, I think once again with as I've been echoing with all my paintings, they're all pretty much painted from emotion rather than any other agenda. Um, the other thing, I suppose, that's also quite interesting with my creative process is, unlike most artists, all my paintings are done in one sitting. Um, and the reason for that, I feel, is I can never revisit an emotion to express what I have to say. So this piece was driven by two things. I had so much that I wanted to express about my emotions, and quite a lot of my works, I think, they sort of expose me a little bit than probably I am comfortable with after creating them.
So if I come up,
Yeah.
well, if there's a painting called Mixed Emotions, I will know that you didn't sit and finish it.
Yeah, you're quite right. And then, of course, to the left, if I may go there, you have seasons. Um, I think this one, once again, is fairly straightforward. Seasons, and I think this season that we're experiencing now is quite indicative of this piece, though this was actually painted middle part of this year. Um, I guess, if anything at all, from this painting, I see faces, quite a lot of it. Um, but I think for me, it was an emotional piece in the respect that, like seasons, we go through different emotions. But I suppose this is quite indicative of a hiatus for me, being at a very good point or place, if you will. Um, and of course, the this piece. Oh, beg your pardon. This piece right here, and it'll be quite interesting to hear your take on this, Josh, after speaking about emotions. Japanese Garden, for me, uh, was pretty much indicative of what my experience of photographic images of Japan, Japanese gardens, what I've seen, the white,
Hmm.
the different colors that you find in the Japanese garden, but also in this case, the way the brush struck on the canvas. It almost kind of, for me, it's a striking of a brush on a canvas, almost kind of like a samurai sword, if you will, very concise, very expedient, and true to its form without waving. Um, and equally as well, with the white, and not just only the black. And this to me just felt very much so a piece that has all these very concise movements, but yet still a wonderful piece to look at. There's no. It's almost kind of like the description of what I would describe a Japanese battle is. It's fair to say the title was my niece's input. We, I showed her this painting that I had finished uh, after creating it on Skype, and she lives in Dublin with my sister, and she pointed out that, I get the sense of as if I was looking at a stellar collision, and it just seemed so apt, because when you think about the stellar collision, the clusters of stars in the galaxy, it just seems so indicative of that. But once again, it's not very much a piece that sort of, that's all you see, and that's what it's going to be. It just keeps evolving, and it gives you back more. And I don't know if you look at this area over here. However, I see the side of a face, almost that you would see in on money, but almost kind of a very male with a beard, a mustache, very much specific eyes, and there we have the forehead and the head. So when you look at that from that perspective, and this would be the left side of the face, I start to think about maybe going back to the Victorian period, on how men used to groom themselves, and that's the sort of facial grooming I see there, a mustache and a very well groomed beard, and that sort of stuff, and of course then you have this whole area over here. Uh, this I see not only just the collision of stars, but I also see, on the other hand, uh, different patterns of weathering, um, a whole cluster collection of weather sources. But stellar collision became a title that I felt relevant, because outside of other things that I see, when I look through the piece and I walk myself through it, I've got some green going on at the top there. I've got close enough to some very deep red there, and I've also got some white here. And then, of course, you've got the obvious orange going on. And so, very indicative of outer space. Yeah. With this piece, quite a lot of paint that I used, the gold and the aquatic green, which is pretty much where the gold sort of hasn't taken over. These are colors that keep evolving as depending on the amount of light that you have, or little light that you have shining on the piece. Black gold, noir gold, black gold is a piece that it seemed a very obvious title to it, one that's not too far-fetched from the piece itself. Quite a lot of if you will, Rothko inspiration. Alas, though, the border is very defined, unlike most of Rothko's work. So there's some influence there. But I think with this piece, if anything at all, it talks, like most of my subjects, politics is never too far off. The exploitation of oil and in some cases quite a lot that's never talked about, but the exploitation of gold minerals. I'm quite glad that I've achieved that because then I have actually said something or started something worth listening to or looking at.
Oh,
So
definitely.
yeah, thank you so much.